And in three, two, one.
You are now listening to the Lapsed Graps podcast.
Hello and welcome to Lapsed Graps, the first ever retro episode of Lapsed Graps. I am Jam, who doesn't watch wrestling, and this is Sam, who does watch wrestling. And if you're a regular listener so far, you recognize how weird it is that I'm introing the podcast so far. But this is, like I said, this is the first ever retro episode where we actually, rather than look at current programming, we're looking at going back in time, kind of. We're going the way back machine to 2007 and looking at Bound for Glory, with TNA having their own Bound for Glory coming up, the 2020 version. We figured we'd go back in time about 15 or so odd years ago to look at 2007 version, just because when I was super into wrestling, when I was like 11, 12, something like that, I really dug this pay-per-view. And just out of curiosity, I was just kind of curious to see if it'll hold up and if both of us will like it. Right, so I guess I can start by just asking Sam, what do you think of the pay-per-view? I don't know if we're diving into that too fast by asking, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, the pay-per-view was really, really good. It was like surprisingly good. It was interesting seeing how like even though they were still, early on in their becoming their own thing. I think TNA started what officially 2004, 2005, somewhere in there, or was it
Yeah,
earlier than that?
I think it was '04.
Okay, so they're 3 years in, they've got the dedicated like TNA centric fan base, but they're still kind of setting themselves apart from the WWE, WCW, ECW kind of crowd with the different stipulations they've got on all the matches. This was the first crowning of the TNA Knockouts division, which was or is rather like a mainstay and a main staple of why people enjoy Impact to this day. Is that Knockouts division is so dominant. So it's really interesting kind of going back and seeing, them crowning their first ever champion in Gail Kim and how that division has evolved so much over the last 13 years.
Yeah, that was definitely like the most interesting aspect to me, and like I'm kind of right there with you with thinking that this pay-per-view was really good. It held up in a lot of ways. It's it held up in some ways, and other ways it didn't, but we'll get through all those ways that it didn't as we go through the show. And there's no better time to, well, I was gonna say let's talk about the first match, but first I just gotta bring up the really good promo at the beginning, just a little video package, just introducing everything. Hot take of the year right here. TNA had the better promo guy compared to WWE. The narrator, just this thundering, booming voice talking about redemption and all these views. It's WWE had the better production value as far as making promos, but TNA definitely had the better narrator. So I'll give them the edge on that. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, 2007, 2008's kind of one of my main like dark spots in wrestling where I wasn't watching a lot of the weekly product and was watching none of like the pay-per-views just because I didn't have that kind of money, and the Blockbuster by my house didn't carry wrestling pay-per-views. So it was interesting kind of going back and then, previous to this going back and watching like older stuff on the WWE network and seeing how it seems like it's in the same way it is now, a lot of give and take where like the WWE will do a certain type of like video package promo where they've got clips from the weekly show with the voiceover, and then like the very next month TNA is doing the exact same thing. So it's interesting. I really enjoy the TNA voiceover guy. The packaging of the video seemed a little awkward, I guess is the way to put it. For one reason or another, maybe the editing just wasn't as crisp as the WWE editing. But as far as like the voiceover guy goes, yeah, I agree. He was really good.
Absolutely. And the booming voiceover guy brings us right into our first contest, which is an Ultimate X match, first ever tag team Ultimate X match between Homicide and Hernandez of the Latin American Exchange and Senshi and Elix Skipper of Triple X. What did you think of this one?
This was really cool because you saw obviously young Low Key before he went on to do his whole thing on his own within the X division, and then later. I think in like 2016, 2017, actually came back as part of the Latin American exchange when they did their whole reboot with Santana and Ortiz. He was very briefly the leader of the Latin American exchange when Conan was not available to be on Impact programming. So that was really cool. And then obviously you hear all these stories of how incredible and how talented Latin American Exchange, the original group, was. But if you weren't around for those kind of like matches at that time, you don't look at it, I think, through the proper lens, because a lot of the things that these guys were doing at the time was incredible because it was the first time anybody had ever been doing this kind of stuff. Now it's sort of old hat. We expect these kinds of things because they've been iterated on so much, like the neck breaker from the rope on top of the structure, so like a 15-foot fall neck breaker, was crazy. Everyone lost their mind because high spots like that hadn't been done regularly. Now we expect stuff like that to happen all the time when you've got guys like Matt Hardy, Jeff Hardy, the Young Bucks, you know, the Lucha Brothers, all these teams that, make their money by doing high impact crazy stuff. But this being the first Ultimate X like tag team match, this is the first time we've seen this kind of stuff go on in an impact ring, and I believe any kind of ring around the American wrestling scene. So that was really cool to see, kind of the impetus of LAX being held in such regard as they are now.
Absolutely. And like we were talking earlier about how the foundation of just mainstream women's wrestling actually being taken seriously kind of started with the Knockouts division in this era. We don't really talk enough about how TNA had a great, as much as they had a great women's division, they also had a really great tag team division. And these two tag teams were kind of two of the best of the lot. Like LAX had obviously a few tag team reigns, so people know how great they are and they remember them very fondly. Triple X, I always thought, was really underrated. Those two, Loki, Luke Skipper, and Christopher Daniels, they were great for like pulling out great spots as you see in the match throughout their careers, but they never really had like a big time run. They were always like an underrated team to me, but they really shined in this match, which was just a really good way to just get the show going. Exciting, fast paced action nonstop. Which also going back to the underrated thing, we gotta talk about how underrated Elix Skipper is, cause just you gotta appreciate the guy, cause when you see spots like this, whether it be the crossbody off the little scaffold thing or the now infamous Hurricane Rana off the catwalk steel cage thing that I don't even know how you call it. He did not get paid enough to do stuff like this. He had no business doing stuff like this. He never got elevated, stuff like this. Never got world tower shot, main event push. No business being up there, but I guess for the love of the game, he was doing crazy shit like this. And for on outside of the camera, it's at least entertaining at the very least. Even though if it didn't amount to anything else, not a paycheck, not a towel, it's just fun to watch at least. So I appreciate him for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. This tag team match really kind of sets the tone for someone who's never seen anything else from the 2007 era. Really sets the tone for how incredible this division was, because you got two teams that, aside from LAX, aren't really remembered that fondly. Like, uh, just destroying one another and doing for nearly 20 minutes, that up until the moment it ends, you have no idea where it's going to go or how it's going to complete. So it was really interesting seeing how much trust they had in four guys that at this point in their careers were still fairly new. Christopher Daniels obviously had done a little bit of work in WCW and all that kind of stuff, but the other three, I'm fairly certain, were still in the first 5-6 years of their careers all told. So just the trust that TNA had in these guys to go out there and do something incredible just to kick off the show, and the fact that they were able to deliver, speaks to the level of talent that TNA was able to bring under their own roof, just because they didn't quite fit the quote unquote ideal WWE guy for that era.
Oh yeah, and just saying they delivered, it's kind of like an understatement when you hear the crowd. Like that crowd was insane, and I guess that you gotta give credit to the TNA fans there because it was clear they just wanted some good wrestling. Like before these guys even locked up, people are just jumping up and down their seats chanting TNA, TNA. Like that that subsection of fans might be just as passionate as like the hardcore ECW fans. So you gotta love him for that. And again, like four guys just at top of the show, there's trust there to just kick off the show in style and really set up the rest of the show for a really entertaining night. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this already, but LAX ended up winning the match and becoming number one contenders for the TNA World Tag Team titles. So you get a great match to get the crowd fired up, and on top of that, you set something really interesting for the future for whoever wins the TNA World Tag Team titles later on in the night. And from something really great, we go to something not so great. The Fight for the Right Reverse Battle Royal, which is 10 times more confusing and 10 times worse than I ever remembered it. For those not familiar with the Fight for the Right Reverse Battle Royal, okay, I'm going to do my best to try explain this. So it's TNA is known for their really wacky gimmick matches. This might have been the wackiest because first you get a horde of basically half the roster coming in trying to secure a spot into the Fight for the Right tournament, which will determine number one contender for the world championship. And you get a whole lot of guys who suddenly forget how to get into a ring. Instead of just running into the, because it's like the first 15 guys to get into the ring or in the tournament, you get all these guys just fighting on the outside instead of just running straight for the ring. Some guys are just standing around because they don't have a spot to do and they're not supposed to get in the ring, so they're just standing around looking stupid. And even in one spot, like Frankie Kazarian was feuding with Robert Roods, and he basically helps Rude get into a match by doing his finisher into the ring on him, which made him look dumb. It the the set for the Battle Royal was dumb in itself, but then like the the Battle Royal sets up the brackets for the tournament. So like first person eliminated will end up wrestling the last person eliminated in the tournament, and then second person and the eighth person, such and such. And then you get the tournament brackets, which when you look at the tournament brackets, it's even wackier than you think because the guy who ends up getting to the tournament finals is not even in the Battle Royal. Christian Cage was in it, and it's who else? Oh yeah, Rikishi was in the Battle Royal. He ended up leaving the tournament because he just left TNA. It was just a mess. This match is
But
a
he was
mess.
Umaga Jr. in this match, if I remember
Close.
correctly from 2 hours ago when I watched it.
Junior Fat 2, I think was his name, but he might
Junior
as well.
Fatu.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
yeah, but you could tell that he didn't even want to be there too. Like it's the whole thing was just a mess for so many reasons. It made people look dumb and just made you not excited for a tournament. And tournament itself was an even bigger mess than this somehow. How'd you feel about it?
Uh, when I did TNA at the start on trying something new, this is one that they could have just gone with a typical battle royal on, and it would have gone a lot smoother. This was weird. I didn't understand what was happening until the match was almost over. I thought it was just a, flat out everyone stands on the outside of the ring when the bell rings. The first eight guys in get in the tournament, and that's the end of the match. And then there was a match when those eight guys got in the ring to determine, I guess, who had a. It was really strange. I mean, it was a way to eat up TV, so that's fine, I guess. But it just, I don't know. It was a swing and a miss for me.
Yeah, it just seemed like a way to just get half the roster on television, but they could have done so in less complicated and confusing ways. On the bright side, at least, Eric Young won the tournament. Not won the tournament, won the Battle Royal match, which is cool for two reasons. One, he ended up pinning the guy who he spent the majority of the year feuding with, Robert Roode, which I went crazy for as a kid, just because watching that feud and seeing where it went now, I thought it was a cool callback. And
Mhm.
two, just because flash forward like 15 plus years later, Eric Young is going to the main event of Bound for Glory 2020 as the World Heavyweight Champion. So it's a cool thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a very cool callback and bit of continuity that you hope they're gonna, mention at least in his like intro package at Bound for Glory of like just showing him pinning Robert Roode. But I guess they don't really own the likeness to Robert Roode anymore since he's now Robert Roode in WWE and not just Bobby Roode. So maybe they won't at all. I don't know. But it's definitely one that you hope that at least like mention that he was in one of the first matches on one of the first Bound for Glory cards that the company ever put on, and now he's main eventing this card defending his world heavyweight title.
Yeah, and like you mentioned Robert Roode too, like that was another wild thing about watching this pay-per-view. Like there were so many guys who just either aren't there anymore or just completely
Mm-hmm.
different characters and completely different companies. Like you had Lance Hoyt who would become Lance Archer. You got Sanjay Dutt, producer in WWE. Eric Young, well Eric Young's back now, but Robert Roode in WWE now. James Storm in NWA, and that's just looking at the people in the Battle Royal. So it's wild just looking at the card top to bottom and see how everybody's changed.
Yeah.
But speaking of the card top to bottom, I'm sorry, did you have something to say?
Oh, I was just going to comment on the fact that, even going as far as going to like the tag team title match, you've got the current and 47-time 24/7 champion R-Truth teaming up with a young up and comer named Atticus Consequences Creed. He had a different middle name, but his nickname is Consequences. They only ever call him Consequences Creed, who is Xavier Woods in the WWE, and they're doing that whole thing. And Woods looked incredible in that match, and it's interesting because if he had ended up sticking with TNA, Impact, and not signing that NXT developmental deal that ended up leading him, well, FCW developmental that ended up leading him to be part of the inaugural class of NXT. It's curious to see if he would be in a James Storm slash oh goodness, what is his name? I'm so bad with names. NWA World Heavyweight Champion right now. Uh,
Nick Aldis?
Yes, if he would be in an Aldis or a James Storm like kind of position right now where he is considered like old hat, like old guard with the NWA, even though he's only like 33, 34 years old and was kind of one of those guys that they put a strap on during the down years to keep the company moving forward. It's a really interesting thought exercise to see where both those guys would be in their career because I mean R-Truth, for those of y'all that don't know, is a multi-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Like the guy is a comedy wrestler at this point because he's 44 years old and he's still able to take those paychecks from the WWE, but he was a serious grappler when he was a little bit younger. It's really interesting to think about.
Absolutely, and that's kind of the perfect segue to get us into the next match, which was the TNA World Tag Team Championship match between challengers Hometown Boy AJ Styles and Tomko versus Team Pac-Man Ron Killings, and it was supposed to be footballer Pac-Man Jones, which, side note, all of the drama.
American football, Pac-Man Jones, not footballer usually means European football, but yeah, American
Oh
football
yeah,
player Pac-Man Jones
yes, thank you for that. Um,
for sure.
yeah, the how familiar are you with the whole drama surrounding Pac-Man Jones going into the show?
Not even a little bit. I didn't realize that Pac-Man Jones that's on TNA when I started watching was the Pac-Man Jones that played in the NFL when I was, 7, 8 years old and would just regularly light people up. It didn't click to me that they were the same person.
Okay, so that gives
So
us
yeah,
time
whatever you
for,
tell me is the first time I'm understanding.
yeah, that we're kind of in the same boat there. Because when I was a kid watching Pac-Man Jones, I had no idea that there was drama surrounding her. I didn't even know who Pac-Man Jones was, just because, which seems to be a common thing with wrestling fans. Like you bring in like supposedly famous celebrity athlete, but no one in wrestling really knows who he is. I did not know who he is, but years later I found out all the drama surrounding him. So the reason he's not playing football right now is because him and Nelly, yes, country grammar rapper Nelly, were in a strip club together, and there was an incident where they made it rain, like actually like throwing money in the air, making it rain. Um, well, they only wanted to make it rain on the strippers, but the promoter of the strip club ran in, told the strippers to pick up the money. Pac-Man Jones did not like that. He grabbed one of the strippers by their hair and got into like an altercation there. This led to some security guards being involved. So his His security was fighting with the strip club security. Guns got pulled out. Someone died. Pac-Man got suspended from his football team. Which, knowing all of that now and seeing all the spots Tina Ham do to make it rain on wrestlers, it's a little distasteful and it's a little nuts. I don't know how you feel about all that information I just said.
Yeah, no, learning that he got booted from the Bengals because he made it rain on a stripper and it ended up leading to someone's death makes the fact that they made it rain on that team that they defeated real gross.
Yes, and
And
it's
he actually wasn't a member of the Bengals when he got booted. He was a member of the Tennessee Titans. That's my bad.
that's it. Well, I didn't know. Or like I know the situation, but I'm not super into football, so I wouldn't know the team. So thank you for at least correcting that. But
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, like it's wild in retrospect, and even more wild that TNA would even take a chance to bring him in because it's only I imagine it only got them bad press because he this altercation happened in February and all the hoopla surrounding his suspension probably progressed into the summer. So that means he got there in like whenever Hard Justice was. I think it was August or July or something like that.
Hmm.
Which then I guess we can also talk about the storyline they had for him that never got resolved. He makes his debut at Hard Justice, made into a big deal. Here comes our Truth, who's tired of seeing athletes come in and take his spot. They get into like a stare down. Pac-Man is attacked backstage. Next Impact, R-Truth swears that he never attacked him, but he will side with him to figure out who attacked him. Somehow that turns into let's become tag team champions, and they end up being Sting and Kurt Angle for the tag team titles. That's a whole another thing that we can get into later. But they won the tag titles. Then they end up facing AJ Styles and Tom Cole, which brings us to tonight. But right until the last minute, it was promoted as Pac-Man Jones getting into the ring for the first time until he just flat out refuses to wrestle in a promo. And that's when he brings in a young lad named Atticus Rashid Consequences Creed, who we now know as Xavier Woods. Did you know about
Yeah, no,
Xavier
it's
Woods,
interesting.
Steve?
Do you think? Oh yeah, no, I knew Xavier Woods was a TNA guy beforehand, even not even because I've like seen his stuff because like I said I wasn't a big TNA guy back in that era, but just like some of his early NXT promos call back to Consequences Creed. I think it was Halloween 2017 on SmackDown. All of the new guys came out in old gimmicks, and he came out wearing the Consequences Creed get up for a match. It was just yeah, it's hard to be a fan of his as a person, let alone as a wrestler, and not know that he was Consequences Creed at one point because he is very open about the fact that like without Impact giving him that start and giving him that chance, he never would be where he is today. And so all of that, it's interesting to me. And I have a question for you. Do you think that the reason that Pac-Man is not necessarily remembered fondly, but not remembered at all, versus someone like David Arquette in WCW, you know, coming in and immediately given a world title is because it was a tag team title, and that's for whatever reason inherently less, or versus like a world title, or what? Why do you think there's not that like immediate frustration and anger with Pac-Man coming in and taking it off two of the greatest wrestlers to ever perform in a ring versus like David Arquette just kind of doing the same thing?
I think it's a combination between it being a tag team title and just because there was a whole layer of drama surrounding Pac-Man Jones. Like you could be upset that he won the tag title, but there's also you could also just be upset just the fact that TNA would give him a gig to begin with. And I think people may have been more mad about that than him winning the title. And again, like tag title, it's and it's been a while since I've seen the actual match they wins the tag titles. When I don't think he actually lifted a finger in there. Like he may have made a pin attempt, but I can't even remember if he pinned anybody. He might have just had our truth do all the work for like the one and The one and only tag team match that he actually quote unquote wrestled in, Pac-Man just kind of stood on the apron the whole time, and then when he won, quote unquote won after R-Truth got the pin, he just kind of started holding the bolts around. So it's less egregious
Hmm.
than seeing David Arquette actually pin a wrestler, I suppose.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But going on to the actual match, this match was really good, one of the better matches, just because it seemed like everyone in the match was very motivated to have the best match they could have. You had AJ Styles, who was in the prime of his career, Tom Cove, another guy who I thought was just really underrated, just being a really great big man, just tossing around little guys. R-Truth just being genuinely great back when he was genuinely great before he was before he was a comedy guy. And then you get Xavier Woods, who's basically wrestling like he's fighting for a contract right now, like just putting
Hmm.
his all out there. And you put all that together. Oh yeah, and AJ Styles being in his hometown, so he's super over, despite the weird dynamic of it basically being heel versus heel. But again, AJ Styles, a hometown boy, so he's like the de facto babyface. Aside from the weird dynamic, it was still a really good match with a really solid ending, save for the whole silly, distasteful make it rain segments. It's really good tag team match, and the right people got over, and AJ Styles and Tom Cole becoming the new champions.
Yeah. No. It was a really, really good match. It struck me how intense Xavier was in this match, because you're right, it really felt like he came out there and had something to prove, either to Impact Management, or I don't know if he was already in talks with coming up and doing a tryout with the WWE at this point, but like, just he had something to prove that he was worth like taking a risk on and bringing into either company, and he definitely worked the hardest of anyone on this match. It was really impressive.
100%. And that leaves us to our next title match, the X Division Championship match between champion Christopher Daniels and Jay Lethal. What'd you think of this match?
This was good because I've obviously seen the clip of Black Machismo and Ric Flair like wooing at each other, and I've seen like bits and pieces of Black Machismo. I saw a little bit of Black Machismo when he kind of re-debuted in Ring of Honor for a hot minute last year, but I've never seen like a full Black Machismo wrestled match, and it was really really interesting how similar his style is as Black Machismo to just Jay Lethal, the best mat grappler in the world, but how distinctly different they feel as well. Like you can tell that he put so much thought into this character, down to the Randy Savage robes all the way into like the mannerisms and the way he carries himself, and how he holds his body weight differently when he's in a hold or when he's like moving to get leverage on somebody. Just looking at, like, if you put him, like his match in this pay-per-view against like his match this week on the Ring of Honor Pure tournament, and just see how different they are, like you can see the through line, you can see the similarities, you can obviously tell that they're the same person, but the way he shifts his body weight, the way he manipulates, the movement of his opponent and things like that are completely different. It's really, really an interesting kind of case study on someone who I think will go down as one of the best guys to ever wrestle that never had a significant run in the WWE.
Yeah, I never really thought about it like that. Like he does the way he carried himself as Black Machismo and the way he carries himself now as Jay Lethal. It's different but similar. It's really interesting when you think about it. Like he and one other thing I can give him credit for the whole Black Machismo stick is that he never let the character override his in-ring stuff. It never got too distracting.
Hmm.
Like he had enough mannerisms to remind you this is a Randy Savage impersonation, but it wouldn't overtake the match. And he still sprinkled in his little stuff that made it unique to him specifically, and something that still kind of holds up today and really held impression on me when I was a kid. Like I loved the Black Machismo stuff when I was a kid, so much so that like seeing him win it tonight when I was younger just was super satisfying, especially just in the context of just for whatever reason he kind of got screwed out of the X Division title like over and over again in the few months leading up to Bound for Glory. Like Jay Lethal had a weird road to Bound for Glory in that he won his first exhibition championship at Slammiversary from Chris Sabin. Then about 2 weeks later, he lost it to Samoa Joe, so Samoa Joe can have his big championship spawns with Kurt Angle with all the belts on the line, and that led to Jay Lethal end up getting the title back by pinning Kurt Angle, but then 2 weeks later he lost it to Christopher Daniels. So it was a weird thing there, but seeing him get at Bound for Glory was super satisfying, and this match was just really good. It was a testament to just how good Jay Lethal was and really how good Christopher Daniels was. And it was really refreshing just to see Daniels just work as a heel. Like, you don't really see wrestlers really work the heel shtick into their matches nowadays. It's they they carry the heel persona, but they don't really inject it into their matches. Like in this match, you actively saw Christopher Daniels struggling to fend off the younger Jay Lethal because he didn't take him seriously, and when he did, he would throw in an eye rake or an eye poke, just simple stuff like that, just to highlight yourself as a heel. That goes a long way into making the match really strengthen the dynamic, I think, and it really paid off in this one.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the whole Christopher Daniels working heel and not seeing a lot of people work very like distinctly, no, I'm a heel, I'm going to do anything to win. I agree with to a point. It's not something that W does very often anymore or at all. Like the most you'll get is maybe Roman Reigns running his mouth while he's beating someone down. But it does seem to be something that AEW is very comfortable doing, and that like harkens back more to the '80s style that Daniels, modeled his entire career after, and that AEW is modeling their entire organization after, where like FTR is doing all kinds of like little heel movements where they're going for the clean break and they get the fingernails into the chest, or Tully Blanchard, who's on the outside like coaching them up, will grab the ankle of an opposing wrestler and trip him up for just a half second and things like that. So it is, I think that level of heel work is still prevalent in today's wrestling, but it's not as front and center as maybe it should be.
I think that's a good point, and I would give AEW credit there. Like their big selling point to a lot of fans was that they feel like something fresh, but also a throwback at the same time. And when it comes to the throwback stuff, they're really good at getting that kind of like NWA heel feel. Like a guy like MJF, for example, feels like a throwback heel who would fit perfectly in days of Four Horsemen and Dusty Rhodes. And they've really
Mhm.
captured that really well. And I guess it makes perfect sense that Christopher Daniels himself ended up over there, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of throwbacks, it's you kind of get like an A's dream match, I suppose, with the Steiner brothers versus Team 3D, aka Dudley Boys, in a 2 out of 3 tables match. This was not as good as I remember. Like I dug the match when I was a kid, not so much now, but I can forgive it just because like Scott Steiner was like fresh off an injury. Like for some context for listeners, I'm not sure how much you know aside from like the promos they showed, but like this match was supposed to happen at Slammiversary, but Scott Steiner in Mexico, he got like a really bad neck injury that he almost died from. And when he miraculously returned, they kind of switched that dynamic. It was OJ Steiner brothers being heel, Dudley Boys being face. They switched it Scott, so that Scott Steiner can play off the whole sympathy of being a babyface who almost lost his life in Mexico, whereas Dudley Boys were in their element of their ECW days, just making fun of them, saying they were making excuses for missing their match, and that turned into this tables match. And I guess because Rick Steiner is much older and Scott Steiner is fresh off an injury, it's you couldn't do much with Team 3D, so it mostly just amounted to just a literal street fight, just walking around the crowd, punching each other in the face, then put each other through a couple tables with an assist from the Motor City Machine Guns. This was just a bona fide brawl between four old dudes, but again, I kind of forgive it. And at the very least, I think with the end, with the Motor City Machine Guns, and at the very least helping the Steiners to win, it at least gives old school fans that feel good moments of seeing their two favorite tag teams, and specifically giving Steiners that feel good moments of winning in the town they debuted in. and also setting up Team 3D's next feud, so it worked out, I guess.
Yeah, it's really funny to me that the way this match is described is four old dudes punching each other, because that's exactly what it was. It was four
Mm.
old dudes that we all kind of assumed at that time were getting close to the end of their career. Yet you've got Scott Steiner, who was in a tournament this year. He was in the Chikara triples tournament, and then you've got Bubba Ray, who was a Ring of Honor champion last year and still very active. So of the four guys, two are still very actively wrestling. It's really funny to me. But yeah, no, I agree. It was a better match than it had any right to be. Let's put it that way. It was a better match than it had any right to be, being that it was the Steiner brothers and Team 3D well past both teams' prime. And I do agree that it was helped out immensely by Motor City Machine Guns making that save and assisting with the win. The 2 out of 3 tables is just a weird stipulation for me. Like they did it, obviously, Team 3D, get the tables, ECW, hoorah, all that kind of stuff. It felt strange to me. It felt like a stipulation that wasn't needed.
Yeah, I feel you there. Like, there's something about 2 out of 3 tables matches that don't really fit. I guess it's because the umph of one big table break is so big you can't really duplicate it 1 or 2 times afterwards. Like they tried to do it, I want to say 3, 4 years ago. It was the night after WrestleMania, and the Dudley Boys fought the Usos in a 2 out of 3 tables match, and it didn't really work as well. Maybe better than this match, but again, not as well. This match was not the dream match that it was hyped up to be, but again, better than it had any right to be, like you said.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's definitely not the worst thing on the card, but it's a close second.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the first ever TNA Knockouts Championship match, a gauntlet for the gold, which basically gives us our second Battle Royal, but of the 2 Battle Royals, I think this was the better one. And I will say that the match itself isn't super memorable. It's memorable when Awesome Khan is in the match. I think that some of the match's biggest high points are when Awesome Khan is just ragdolling people, and when she's thrown out of the ring just anticlimactically halfway through. The match is significantly less interesting, even more so when you get to the last 2 competitors. It kind of made it too obvious that Gail Kim was going to win. Like all respect to Roxy Laveau, because from what I hear, she was really good, like kind of like coach and confidant behind the scenes. But like no one really bought into her becoming the first Knockouts champion. But still, like while the match itself wasn't that memorable, Gail Kim winning that belt for the first time and holding it over her head, that still stands tall as just an all-time great moment, I think. So it's worth it.
Yeah, no, it was definitely an interesting match, if not because it was particularly good, but just seeing who they had in their heads as like the faces and future stars of this new division with the company that is just not there a couple months later. Like Roxley Roxy Laveau had a really good showing in that match, but didn't really, you know, hold much of a candle to Gail Kim. It was pretty obvious from the moment that Gail Kim entered the match that she was going to be the one to win, especially, like you said, once they had Awesome Kong out of the ring. It was wild to me that it seemed like, at least from watching the promos, that ODB was kind of being set up to be the face of the Knockouts division, and that mouthpiece, the gold standard by which the knockouts were going to end up judging themselves for years to come. And obviously, it ends up being Gail Kim being the winningest knockout in the history of the promotion. It was just a really interesting kind of look back in the past and see, now with 2020 hindsight, where the promoters thinking of taking things and where they ended up.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's kind of leads me to ask the question, like, do you think that TNA made the right call in putting the belt on Gail Kim and having her basically become the leader of that division for years to come? Or do you think they should put their chips on ODB like the promos kind of signaled?
I think anyone who looks back at Gail Kim and ODB's careers and says, it should have been ODB, it shouldn't have been Gail, just isn't paying attention. Gail is legitimately one of the greatest, if not the greatest, in-ring women's performers ever. You can throw her up there with Mickey James, you can throw her up there with Lita, you can throw her up there with anyone you want, and she's going to come out on top 9 times out of 10. I think they obviously made the right decision. If they didn't think they would have, ODB would have gotten more title runs in her time. She didn't. Gail did, and that's just kind of where it goes. So I absolutely think they went with the right choice there.
100% agreed there. And just hindsight being 2020, Gail Kim just did a phenomenal job carrying that division for many years to come. With the biggest highlight being her feud with Awesome Khan, which always gets compared to like Vader versus Sting, Vader versus Flair, but those matches are kind of incredible. Like they very much stand high and tall with those type of comparisons. So like if anybody wants to check out those matches, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and that's one that I'm probably gonna have to go back and look into because I've seen bits and pieces of Gail Kim and Awesome Kong, but I've never sat down and like worked my way through their entire like chronology against one another. But with as highly regarded as Gail Kim is, and as highly regarded as Awesome Kong is, and is becoming to be, like, I think she's getting a lot more respect the later into her career she gets. She was kind of looked as just, a big girl that they could put in there to kind of ragdoll people around. And I think she's getting a lot more respect now for how incredibly talented she is as a wrestler. I'll have to circle back and check all of that stuff out.
Awesome. That brings us to our next match. Samoa Joe versus Christian Cage with Matt Morgan as a special guest enforcer. It's worth saying that like technically Christian's undefeated streak apparently was on the line because he in like 2 years they say he never was pinned or submitted. They say that though. I distinctly remember like 5 months before that he tapped out in the main events of Sacrifice and it counted. So I never really understood the whole undefeated thing, but hey, it's TNA '07. What can you do? But what did you think of this match?
This was really, really good. This is another one where like I have a pretty big blind spot. I hadn't seen much of Samoa Joe really until he rocked up in NXT as that surprise entrant, and people started immediately chanting his name. Immediately got into the gimmick, and I was like, oh, okay, I need to go back and find some stuff with this guy. Christian is easily one of the most underrated performers of that like attitude era. Being teamed with one of the guys that is going to go down as one of the greatest of all time in Edge definitely helps to make you seem a little less important in what you're doing in the ring. But I think this match just kind of goes to show how good he was. This could have easily been a Samoa Joe squash match, and Christian did everything in his power to make us believe that he was actually holding his own, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, like you say, that could have been a squash. And I think that made the dynamic of the match really interesting. It kind of like, and kudos to commentary, like they really highlighted this as well. Like they kept making a point in saying that Christian's never gone into a match being the strongest guy in the room, but Mike Tenay said that he's won matches by being the smartest guy in the room, and that's kind of what Christian was doing. Like for the first few minutes, Mojo was kind of ragged on Christian, but it's Christian will get the upper hand by getting just outsmarting him every now and again. Like rather be something as simple as a heel move like an eye poke or reversing a back body drop into a DDT. He was able to get the upper hand. It was really interesting to see him find different ways to outsmart the bigger guy. And then like you get the end with the Tom Cole and AJ Styles interfering, Matt Morgan stopping the interference, which stranger enough it kind of got me hyped to see Matt Morgan versus Tom Cole. And I'm not even sure if they ever did that, but they set that up really well. And then Samoa Joe kind of overcoming the adversity to tap Christian out. It was all really well done. I don't think you could have played things out more perfectly, and it made out to a really good match, and Samoa Joe got the win.
It was really good. It really showcased both of these guys. One near the end of his career, one like right at the start, and both that would go down to be known as some of the best to do it.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our second to last match on the card. Monsters Ball, which is just TNA's fancy name for hardcore match, between Abyss, Raven, Rhino, and Dustin Rhodes, aka Goldust, aka Black Rain in this match. Uh, my all of my notes for this match consist of Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. So, do you have more condensed thoughts than that?
Yeah, this match being the sixth ever Monsters Ball match they put on, uh, made me wish that they had not made the Monsters Ball as not prevalent, but as overutilized as it is. So 2007, we're at Monsters Ball number 6. The last time it had been seen before this was at the Bound for Glory the year before. So it'd been an entire year since we saw that match. And then right around there is when they just start throwing Monsters Balls whenever they can. I mean, you've got, 3 years later, you've got Jeff Hardy and Abyss in 7 Monsters Balls over the course of 3 months. So it's a matter of, if you wanted to do hardcore matches and have an excuse to do a hardcore match on your card, maybe come up with a different name and keep the Monsters Ball not so much sacred but important. It's in the same kind of vein as like why people don't love Hell in a Cell, or don't love the Elimination Chamber right now, because it's coming, it's going to be done and overdone at this point. So I think this was a really good one. It's probably one of the last really good ones up in the most recent Monsters Ball, which was the first ever all-female Monsters Ball with Ty Valkyrie, Jessica Havoc, Rosemary, and Sue Young for the Impact Knockouts Championship, which was done last year at Slammiversary in Dallas. These are probably my two favorite Monsters Ball ever.
Okay, I did not know about the all-female Monsters Ball. I might have to check that out. It's on paper, it's definitely for amazing women, man. I'm sure that's a amazing match. With this
I'll have to send
match,
the article.
all
It's
right, awesome.
crazy.
Yeah, like this match itself was kind of, I would say, crazy and one of the better Monsters Balls they had. Like, I do agree with you. They're in later years, they kind of oversaturated that gimmick a little too many times. It went to the well too many times with that one. But with this one, it was still fresh. It still felt like something new, and it, despite just essentially being a hardcore match, it felt unique enough, I guess, because of whatever vibe TNA gave it, that felt more than a hardcore match. Like the stakes were higher, even though there were no titles on the line, no real stakes to the match, but it just felt bigger in scope, and it just made the spots even more dangerous, whether it be something like Rhino goring himself through a wall, or Abyss Black Hole slamming Raven through thumbtacks and glass, just get really violent stuff like that. So if you're really into like hardcore wrestling, ECW stuff like that, then you may want to check this out. This is definitely the match for you. And best of all, it's apparently this is the first time that Abyss won a Monsters Ball. So in all the years that he was even in one, it was cool to finally see him actually win one.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one where you see where they're going with it. You see that, by bringing in Rhino and guys from that ECW heyday to perform in these kinds of matches, they're trying their best to, call in on a bit of nostalgia with the deathmatch stuff, and they absolutely deliver in this one. It just, again, it makes me a little sad that it became kind of a given that it's going to be a match that you're going to see, 3-4 times a year. And I'm glad they're getting back to a point now where it's a much more rare thing. Uh, it's one of those where I think the benefit comes in the scarcity.
100%. And that brings us to the main event of the evening. Kurt Angle defending the TNA World Heavyweight Championship against Sting. This is Sting's second straight Bound for Glory main event, and it's kind of a dream match between him and Kurt Angle, heightened by the fact that there's like a personal grudge between them. Just they couldn't really sell on just having the one-on-one dream match. Kurt Angle kind of beat up Sting's son on the road to Bound for Glory, which, hey, it's weird storyline stuff, but hey, it amounted to a really great match. Like, if I had to pick what was the best match of the night, and there were a few really great matches to really fill out that spot, I'd go with the main event. Like their chemistry was just on point. Like you had two veterans just not quite neither was really in the prime of their career, but both were skilled and had that in-ring IQ high enough to really know how to work with each other really well. And it amounted to a really good technical match, I think. And well, first let me ask, what did you think of the match before I bring up what I got to bring
This
up?
was Yeah, this was really, really good. It was a very like the closest match I can think of to like equate, if you haven't seen this before, is the Mr. Brody and Cody Rhodes dog collar match from last week on AEW, where it was just, we don't like each other and we're going to beat the hell out of each other, and you're going to sit there and you're going to like it, damn it, because I told you so. That's where this goes. Like, I think you could have done this match without the restraining order on Kurt Angle's wife and the beating up Sting's son for talking back to Kurt Angle. I think you could have done this without it, but I'm kind of glad you didn't, because it adds that extra level of vitriol and that little bit of like storyline vitriol to be like, no, I legitimately can't stand this guy, but now I have a reason to actually punch him in the face in storyline, and that works for me. You could see that these guys respected each other and that they trusted each other to do what they needed to do in the ring, but you could also see very clearly in some of the strikes from Sting, and especially some of the holds from Angle, that just because they respected each other and trusted each other did not mean that they liked each other. And it did not mean beer after this match. And that might have all been storyline. And if it is, kudos to those guys, because I bought in hook, line, and sinker. These two hated each other, and I loved every minute of it.
Absolutely. And like it was what I really like about this is that it was a very different type of grudge match. With most grudge matches, you see the baby face running straight into the heel and the heel kind of taking advantage and just the heel playing smart while the baby face is playing with emotion and it makes them basically outsmart them a little bit. With this one, it was very much not only two guys respecting each other, but commentary kept putting over the fact that Sting knew that he couldn't let his emotions get the best of him. So he's playing it smart for as long as he can, but for like small things that Kurt Angle would do, like smush his face in the corner, that's when Sting will kind of go ballistic and do like an open palm strike or just give him the hardest knife edge chop that you can hear. And the more that he got frazzled, that's when Kurt Angle will find an opening to get back into the match. And like I thought that was just really interesting. Like you could tell that both these guys going into the match and kind of thought out like what type of story you want to tell in this match and how we make this unique. And I think they really pulled it off really well.
Yeah, no, this was a really good story-based wrestling match, which is where my love of wrestling comes in. Like, spot monkey stuff is great, violence for the sake of violence is great, but violence that tells a story is what makes me love this art form and this platform as a whole. And this is one of those matches that I hope they're making them watch in the New Japan dojo, the Ring of Honor dojo, whatever training center Impact has, if they have one at all. I think they just bring in talent that's already graduated and they don't make them retrain at all. But AEW's Nightmare Factory, all these things where you've got that class where you're like, okay, we're going to talk about in-ring psychology and how to tell a story without overtelling that story. I think this is a perfect match to show that, because Sting never opens his mouth, never says a crossword, never, has that moment where he's digging Kurt Angle's face into the mat and yelling at the camera. He keeps his mouth shut. He goes in there and he has a job to do, and he does it damn good. He knows he needs to beat him down. He knows he needs to prove to him that he disrespected him, and it's not going to stand. And the only way to do that with a guy like Kurt Angle is to beat him within an inch of his life. And that is why I really love this match.
Absolutely. It's a match I think more people need to be talking about, more people need to see, and like you said, more wrestlers need to study. And there's one particular moment that I'd be amiss if we didn't bring up the Miss 450 splash spot from Kurt Angle, which when I was a kid, I didn't even know that it was a botch. People have been talking about it being a botch in more recent years, but seeing it at 11 years old, I thought it was just like a legit cool move. Like this 450 knee buster thing, like I thought that was nuts. Looking back at it now, you can tell that he goes for a 450 splash and he just kind of overshoots it a little bit. But man, that's still
Hmm.
just a wild moment. I'm surprised people don't talk about that in the same vein that we talk about the Brock Lesnar shooting star spot at WrestleMania, which granted it's a little different because Brock nearly broke his neck on that one, but Kurt Angle nearly broke Sting's sternum in that match, and we never talk about it. That's nuts to me.
Yeah, no, that spot in that match, it's very similar to like the way that I don't know if you've heard the story, but it strikes me very similar to a story that Drew McIntyre told recently. I don't know if you've heard it. You've been a bit off the grid for a while, but the reason he came up with the brogue kick apparently is during a NXT house show he went up to drop kick somebody and split his pants. So when he split his pants, he had to come down weird, and he basically drop kicked him, but with just one leg, like way up, while keeping the other leg and his hands like down to cover himself. And that's how he came up with, or not the brogue kick because that's Sheamus, but you know what I'm saying. His big boot that he does, his punt, but not really a punt. Anyway, that's how he came up with that. It seemed like that sort of thing where like you botch it in the moment, but then you make it safe. So from botching and almost exposing himself to a house show crowd, he came up with one of the more devastating finishers that doesn't look like it should be devastating, but it is because it's sold that way in the WWE today. And it's one of those things where I wish Kurt Angle had been sober enough at that point in his career to realize, oh, I've got some here, and then go in and figure out a way to do that safely. Because watching him throw that move down just like in the middle of a WrestleMania when he made his return, or even later again at another Bound for Glory, or in that match where he ends up holding all the gold in TNA, would have been incredible. Even especially if that was the only other time he brought it out. I was like, oh hey, you remember this? I'm doing it again, and it's gonna win me the match. It would have been such a pure pop. And it would have completely changed the narrative around that one spot. So it's one of those things you wish he had done, but you understand looking back on it how dangerous it was in the moment, and how as a responsible person you might look at that and go, oh, I'm never doing that again. That's never happening. No thank you.
Absolutely, and I have heard that Claymore spot. I think Drew's told that story a few times now because I heard him talk about it in an interview like a couple years ago, and like you see the footage, like you said, like he clearly just rips his pants and he slips when he tries a big boot, but he kind of looked at it
Hmm.
as like, wow, I've got something with this because that looks devastating when you see it in person, and then like I'm looking at the 450 again, and it's kind of like, why hasn't anyone else done this? Like, it's one thing for Kurt Angle to try to do it again, but I'm surprised nobody's seen that match and thought I could probably do something with this. Like, because again, that could be a devastating finisher, you know?
Especially in a world when like the Kinshasa and the coup de grace, which are way more scary looking when done right, are like active finishers being used, or even like the curb stomp was an active finisher being used and then banned and then being brought back. Uh, that should very like the 450 into the knees should very clearly be something that someone in one of the performance centers around the world is working on to make it happen, because the first time someone breaks that out on purpose on like a main stage, it's going to be the only thing anyone can talk about for weeks.
100%. And I'm keep my fingers crossed that somebody finds a way to do it safe to just make it their finisher, but we'll have to see. Hopefully, some wrestler or wannabe wrestler is watching this and thinking I'm putting that in my notes or something like that. But
Oh,
yeah,
I'm sure it's going to show up on backyards before too long. Like, if
oh,
not
I
on
hope
a New
so.
Japan or something like that, it'll show up on like a backyard best of tape, and then people will start stealing it from there.
I hope so, man. But yeah, I just need to bring that up just for the sake of staying stomach for having to go through that and
Oh,
no one talking about it again. But yeah, that was insane. The match was fantastic and gave us another great Bound for Glory moment for Sting of him holding up the belt high above his head. So nothing wrong with that. Just capped off a really good night of wrestling, I think. So what do you think of the pay-per-view overall scene after we've talked about it?
it was really, really good. It's hard for me to get into old wrestling like that. Like, there's a weird middle ground where like I can watch stuff from a couple years ago, and I can watch stuff from like the early 90s, early 80s, and be really into it. But like 2002 to 2009, 2010, it's really hard to keep my focus. And I think that just goes to like speak to the level of work that was going on in the ring and the level of story that was going on. But this one really held my focus all the way through, and that's a big compliment to TNA and Bound for Glory for that era. It's wild that was, I think, Bound for Glory 4, and we're about to have Bound for Glory like 20 something. It's insane. It doesn't feel like it should be that much in such a short time. But yeah, no, it was really phenomenal. And if I had been old enough and with enough, cash on my own to buy this show at that point in my life, I absolutely would have. Or if I had had access to it at like a, a Blockbuster or Hollywood Video or Home Video or anything like that, I probably would have just made the guy at Blockbuster just say, just keep the tape, kid, because I would have kept getting it, kept doing it, and kept trying to recreate that 415 on my couch cushions at home.
Absolutely, man. I'm right there with you. Like, this is just a really good show. I really dug it as a kid. It's a big reason I really wanted to talk about for this episode. And seeing this is kind of like my pseudo reintroduction to wrestling, because this is my first like actual wrestling match I've seen in so many months, man. And like, it just held up with flying colors. Especially from that era of TNA where they were having so many issues behind the scenes. This is kind of like an unspoken of gem, I think, that no one really talks about. But again, you get your money's worth, and I think it holds up in 2020. And with that said, that's really it for today. So before we head out, is there anything you want to plug?
Just keep an eye on dailyddt.com and fansided.com. I've got an interview going live here in probably the next week or that I did with fans or for Fansided as part of their MMA coverage, talking to a champion with one championship, which is the, for lack of a better term, the UFC of China and of the Middle Asian countries over there. So that was really fun. I'm writing new stuff all the time, so just keep an eye on that, and you'll see where I go.
Nice, man. And then on that, I'll piggyback and say follow Sam on Twitter so you can find all the stuff you can do, or that he's gonna do. I mean, at Gladden, comma Sam. That's my name. What do you usually say? That's Gladden with a Gladen. I'm not good at your catchphrases.
GladenCommaSam. That's Gladen, comma Sam, and you want to spell out that comma.
That's the one. Spell out the comma. Yeah. See, you gotta write scripts for me. You're better at intros and outros than me. But now I gotta do my own outro somehow. So you can follow me at Wham Bam is Jam on Twitter and Instagram. That's Wham with a WAM, Bam with a BAM as in Bam Adebayo, and Jam as in the jelly you put on your peanut butter. So you can also
Jam's not jelly. Jelly is jam, though.
oh, edit, cut that out.
It's a similar thing to like rectangles or squares, but squares aren't rectangles.
Oh. As far as I'm allergic to peanut butter, so I clearly don't know anything about peanut butter or jam.
Fair enough.
Oh man, I'm keeping all of this now. Keeping all that in. Oh
Go
yeah,
for
Wham Bam
it.
it's Jam, Twitter and Instagram, Mental Health Check-In Podcast. That's my mental health awareness podcast. Look at it at Check-In Pod on Twitter and at Check-In Podcast on Instagram. I've got a buddy who just started their first podcast called Broke Talk. You can look at that on Instagram, Broke Talk Podcast. And they're on all the socials, YouTube, Spotify, just like us. And you can find Lapsed Graps, that's LAPSED space GRAPS on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, YouTube. Subscribe to us, like us on YouTube, give us a review on Apple Podcasts and a rating. All that stuff helps to just get our name out there, and we really appreciate it. And until next time, we out.
We out.